So all the speakers have set out their stalls now and we're ready for the debate. One quick thing, you were all asked, you know, whether you're going to vote yes for the motion, against it, or you're going to abstain. We've got those numbers now. 64 of you actually agreed with the motion. 55 said no, and 17 were differers, so they abstained. So after the debate, we're going to have another tally, and we're going to see which side has changed the most hearts and minds. So, questions now.
Jeff Beacon, the proprietor of Guardian Readers Rob the Poor.org.uk. Guardian Readers rob the poor because Guardian Readers own houses and they've made enormous bonuses from that. And they get their kids into education, which of course is a positional good, largely. You know, you get your kids the jobs that other kids won't get. And I think it's a bit of a fantasy that we just sort of educate everyone, give them diplomas if anyone's read Rumbold's Door, and get out of this labour market that isn't strong. What we've got to do is recognise that the rich and affluent have been stealing from the poor, and we ought to if you want to give the poor jobs, subsidise them into jobs. And that's what we ought to. And there's another thing coming over the horizon. Guardian readers will have enormous carbon footprints, and the poor will have much lower carbon footprints. And I've got a lovely map showing the hypocrisy index from Westminster to the Champagne Socialists of Hampstead.
Can we quickly wrap that up?
By multiplying their greenness by the number of quality flights they take.
So you're talking about Champagne Socialism?
And, yeah, so what I want to ask the panel is, do you recognise that the rich are screwing the poor and screwing the world, and because the poor are poor, they can't do it as much?
John, do you think you could, respond to that one?
Well, I never go for those kind of knee-jerk things. If you look at it this way, what's his name? Sir Philip Green, a couple of years ago, for the 21st birthday party of his daughter, he spent £21 million, flew in people like McCartney and all those people, to the south of France, and had a real jing-jing, and everybody got upset. Everybody, the Occupy people got upset, and all that. And people like this gentleman here probably got very upset.
The carbon footprint of all those aeroplanes.
Anyway,
do you know
so the point
into the world?
But I tell you what they do, they leave you out of the equation. Because the thing about Mr. Green, Sir Green, was created by my daughters, my ex-wives, my wives, my bloody mates and all sorts of things. The billionaires are created largely by us because most of them come through the marketplace. So if we don't fucking like Sir Philip Green, then we, as consumers, as parts of this enormous power, should do something about it, but we don't. What we do is we moan about it. And I'm really cheesed off. And that's why I don't like The Guardian, because Mrs. Philip Toynbee, and maybe our friend here, doesn't really want to educate a lot of people so they can become the next Polly Toynbee or the next Owen Yams. That's what I want.
Patrick, what would you say to that?
I'm a bit baffled actually about the question. Like John,
wide reception. So.
I'm not one who generally likes the rich screwing the poor. What I would say as an observation is that generally speaking, the poor are screwed. True. My observation is that generally speaking, that's not because of their own personal failings, but that's because they have been screwed by bigger, more structural forces. My other observation is that too often wealthier people, and I'm not just talking about the super rich, I think
I'm
talking about comfortable people, don't actually realise that the poor are being screwed and how badly they're being screwed. And I think that's something that...
Tell your readers.
No heckling, yeah? Democracy is all about listening to people. We
Patrick,
don't listen.
What about the consumers who create the Philip Greens, who create the Steve Jobs? aren't they therefore indirectly screwing the poor because they're creating these enormous behemoths? You know, with these people at 1% owning 38% of the world, created largely by us and by your parents and by the consumers of the world. When are we as consumers going to get up and say, we've had enough of this gap between rich and poor, we're not going to go to Tesco's, we're not going to go to these places? That's what I want. I want that because I believe very strongly that's where the gap between rich and poor comes from.
We are getting screwed, but it's not just by Guardian readers. I don't think we should let Times readers or Telegraph readers off with at the same time.
Or even the big issue readers.
Or even big issue.
Yeah, you out there screwing.
The Guardian has a soft conscience.
Oh, I think they've got.
Makes them a good
I don't think anyone who regularly reads The Guardian or Patrick's stuff as I do would say that he doesn't tell his readers how bad the situation is for poor people in this country, especially, for example, my generation, who, you're quite right, wealthier people are buying homes, they're then renting them out at ludicrously expensive prices, they're scalping the market twice. Once on the price of the house, which they can sell on an enormous profit, and two, on an increasingly high rent. And both of those are detrimental, especially for young people who will never be able to afford houses and will struggle to afford the rent. So, on your essential point that there is a real flaw in our economy in terms of housing, I would agree with that, but I'd say that there are many people at fault in this country, and I certainly don't believe Patrick or The Guardian are particularly close to the top of that.
Lovely. Let's move on to another question.
It seems both sides can agree that jobs are the main thing. That's the main point of this discussion, because there has to be an alternative to being on benefits, and that would come from the form of jobs. But it seems like only one side of this argument, or the debate, has one either started a company and employed people, or one has, I mean, I'm being biased here, but my opinion, the solution to creating more jobs. We talked about when we leave university or whatever form of education, what we have to look forward to, whether that's TGI Fridays or a call centre. Whereas in the good old days, you could have gone down the mine, and that would have been a lot better. But unfortunately, the Nazi government closed that down. But we talk about subsidising in that sense. I mean, whilst you're on benefits, you are being subsidised by the government. Whilst you worked in the mines and the industries that weren't efficient, which is why they were closed, you were being subsidised because they were nationally owned. So my question to the panel would be your solution to finding these jobs, to actually making it happen. Otherwise, this whole notion of the debate is pointless.
Camilla?
Oh, and I've never read The Guardian as well, so I'm a good person.
I think it is right. Jobs have been addressed as the main factor in this debate, and something that I try to pick up on is that it's not just, obviously the solution is getting people into jobs and into jobs that pay well and that they can have a higher living standard from. But I think part of the problem is, yes, we need to push people into these jobs. We also need to look at, I think again this goes back to the other gentleman's question, there are so many factors that mean that people on low pay and people in jobs that pay minimum wage or have 0-hour contracts, all that kind of thing, the reason their income doesn't go far enough is because so many expenditures that people have to make, so things on not just housing is a massive thing, but energy, food, travel, so many of these things that every single household has to give a large portion of their expenditure on are so expensive because of the things that government are doing. And government could be doing a lot to bring these costs down, and that's something that just isn't addressed at the moment. We like you said, we have this fixation on helping people through cutting them a check that at the moment is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's something that we simply cannot afford. We're borrowing over £100 million every single year, and we're not making a dent in the deficit. And difficult decisions have to be made, and like I said earlier, it's not that we want to reduce that safety blanket or that we don't want to protect people, but obviously there is having a sustainable amount of welfare, and then there is helping people that actually need it. And at the moment, a better way of helping people would be actually bringing down the amount that they have to spend on things that they find themselves spending huge amounts of money on every day.
Patrick?
The thing about, the thing I worry about this government in particular is that I'm not quite sure whether they're really that enthused about creating loads of great, good, well-paid jobs, particularly at the lower end. I think actually they're all about cutting expenditure. And that means for them, at least publicly, rhetorically, cutting the welfare bill. But when you start cutting subsistence level benefits for people who are out of work, what normally happens, and you know, you talk to food banks or Citizens Advice Bureau about this. What normally happens is those people are pushed further away from the job market because they become less able to, less active, less able to respond. I mean, even at a very practical level, you know, you can't even afford this service to the job employment. The second point I'd make is cutting working age benefits doesn't actually save you a huge amount of money. The welfare budget is huge, it's about 190 billion. We spend just 3% of that is unemployment benefit. It's a tiny amount. Most of the benefits, most of the social security budget goes on old age pensions. So again, all I'm saying is let's have a bit of perspective.
John, where does your view differ from Patrick's? Because in an interview with Afshin Rattanzi on RT, you said the government have got it wrong because they're mixing austerity with the cuts with reform. You can't have reform with cutting.
Yeah, well,
so where do you disagree with
Yeah,
Patrick?
I disagree. You know, putting the old age pensioners together in the social security framework was, I think it was either Harold Wilson or it was Jim Callaghan. And up till then, you had very, very separate parts. So you could look at what old age pensioners were, which was a contributory system. And then you had separation, and the government's put it together. I suggested to Mr. Ian Duncan Smith, why don't you separate it all out so that people can see? You see, where I fall out with those people who say leave things as they are, is that they say that there are not these people out here who were being destroyed by living on social security. I meet hundreds of them. I'm only going on my own experience. I don't need statistics. Members of my own family, nieces and nephews, who have produced children, who are all on social security, living on the edge of London, in large housing estates, where they're going fucking mad. And what I want is I want to liberate them. I want them all to turn into little Owen Joneses. But they can't do it, because there are these people who are largely liberal-minded, who are impeding the people I come from. I got out because I was fortunate. I kept getting nicked. And every time I got nicked, in the good old days, they taught you a new thing. They taught you to read and write. They taught you to appreciate Rembrandt and all those sorts of people, and, you know, and Beethoven, and I became posh like you. But they don't do that now. And what my real anger is those people who won't allow us to reform social security in order to bring social mobility, which is so that they can become a Patrick Butler or they can become an Owen Jones. These people who are incredibly, I want them all to be John Bird. I want them to be like me. And there are all these people who impede it, because they're always going on about defending the whole of the social security system, when really, if they were thinking about it, they'd be saying, this part really works bloody well. That part is absolute crap and is a bastille. And I can tell you, I could bring people into this room who have been destroyed by it, and they must be typical. It's not just my family and my mates.
We're going to go a bit modern here and take a question from Twitter. We're going to keep going with the normal questioning style later, but this is a question from Georgie at Ginger Gamble, so give her a follow. How does the panel think universal credit, and in particular cuts to housing benefit, has impacted social mobility? Mark?
We'll not know about universal credit until it's actually implemented, because I guess because I actually agree with a lot of what John's saying. I think trying to defend the current welfare state as if it's set in stone and can't be changed, it can't be improved, is a huge mistake, because there are things about, you know, as I said, I want to slash welfare spending, but I want to do it the right way by getting people back to work, not by making the most desperate in our society more desperate. But these big sweeping changes to a benefit system are incredibly difficult, as we've seen with universal credit. Only a fraction of those who are meant to be on universal credit are already receiving it. The end point for which it will be fully implemented seems to be receding further and further into the future. In terms of housing benefit cuts, I mean, we could talk about the bedroom tax. The problem with the bedroom tax is not that moving people from houses that are, in theory, bigger than they need into ones that are more proportionate is necessarily a bad idea, although it does run contrary to the idea of security of tenure in the social housing system. The problem is taking money from people, telling them to move into a smaller property, and then not being smaller properties for them, and therefore penalising them because there is a lack of housing supply, right? It's not that there are loads of people, in their 50s and 60s yucking it up, smoking a cigar in their 3-bedroom council house going, my kids have moved out, this is amazing, bring in a pool table. What's actually happening is they're seeing nearly 20% of their housing benefit, which means that they can't afford to eat, they can't afford to pay their bills, they can't afford to get the bus into town taken away from them because there isn't a 1-bedroom, there isn't a 2-bedroom. Pardon me?
I said, who's going to pay for removal?
Well, exactly. I mean, but so we have the disgusting case this week, defended by the government, of a woman known only as A, who lives in a 2-bedroom house. 3-bedroom house. 1 bedroom's for her, 1 bedroom's for her son. 3rd bedroom is a panic room, which had been professionally put in by the police. The purpose of that is that if her ex-partner, who has previously raped and assaulted her, tries to come to her house to attack her or her son, she has a safe place where she can go, she can lock the door, and she can call the police. The government are taking her to court to pay the bedroom tax because they say she has a spare room, she is over-occupying, she should pay a charge, and she should move to a smaller property that would not have that facility. I think that's disgusting.
Is that necessarily this government, or is... I could give you really horrible things. Back in the good old days when Polly Toynbee was in government, when the Labour were in government, Polly was spending all the time...
member of the SDP,
Polly
so
was telling all the time,
government.
telling us about these stories.
She does toe the Labour Party line though, doesn't she?
No, she spent a lot of time, up until Mr Blair and Mr Brown got kicked out, slagging off the government, and quite rightly, because the system itself is screwed. So, I mean, we can do all this stuff.
Of course, look, I'm not going to defend every single welfare.
If you're not getting next time, we'll be moaning our arse off about you lot.
Camilla? Where to take it?
Yeah, where to go? In terms of universal credit, I mean, like Mark said, the problems of the rollout and the delays aside,
But the general idea,
what Ian Duncan Smith is
rolling
trying to
everything
do,
into one.
and rolling everything into one, we have a hugely convoluted and complex system at the moment. And like I was saying at the start, when you move into work and you start earning and your wages go higher and higher, your wages are being eroded by the taxes you're paying, national insurance, you're paying income tax, and then your benefits are being withdrawn as well. And this is something that a good aspect of universal credit, once it is universal, it will actually bring down that rate. And even though, the problem is though that it will still be at a relatively high rate, but it's lower than what it is at the moment. So Ian Duncan Smith's sort of vision for this system, where it's much clearer whether you're better off in work or out of work, is good. And it's good that efforts are being made to reform a system that fundamentally fails people. But there are also vast amounts of issues with universal credit, in the sense that the marginal amount of tax that you're paying and the benefits you earn is still very high, and obviously the obvious rollout issues. But I think Mark is correct when he talks about this idea that we don't have enough houses, and therefore we can't push people into living in houses where they have the amount of bedrooms that they use. But this is something that, again, we need to address by building more houses. We need to liberalise planning laws so that development increases. We need to actually make substantial efforts to encourage businesses to build more houses so that that solves that problem.
Good, I'm very conscious about the time. John's got to be shipped back to Cambridge very soon, so we're going to take one more question.
Please let me just say this is very simple. I was involved in the early days of a universal credit under a particular guy called Mr Brown, because what it was people like me said, how comes when you look at social security and you look at the social pound, in order to deliver £1 to anybody who needs social security, it'll often cost 3, 4 or 5. And the idea of universal credit, which came out of Mr Tibbett, or whatever his name is, who was the DWP guy in the Labour Party at the time, was to reduce the costs of delivery, so that money, or most of the money, could go to the people in need. And actually, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten the fact that the people who are really making money out of social security are not the people who are getting the money, it's the suppliers. It's people like bloody Serco and all these other people who are hovering around. They're the people who are conning us. And that's why the social security bill looks like a rocket. It's the tip that gets to the people in need, and the rest is the bureaucracy and all of the party, you know, the private, public bloody things. This is the crime of it all.
Okay, we've got 2 questions which I've selected from Twitter. Sorry for the rest of you. But this is the first one, and we're going to roll them into one, and we're also going to have closing statements. So let's try and be as brief as we can, because we want to count up the votes as well. So is the benefit system just taking away the role of charities, and now neither are effective? That's from Tom AC. And then we've also got another question. What do the speakers think of Channel 4's programme Benefit Street? Now, I think that was aired earlier this year, and there's a real international uproar about that. So if we could mix and mingle the 2 questions together, plus 2 or 3 minutes each for speakers' address. I know it's messy, but we're going to have to do it. So, Patrick.
For charities, actually no. What the welfare reforms are doing is giving charities a much bigger role. So you'll have seen from my report yesterday on the rise of food banks, what's actually happened because the welfare system doesn't work, because people have subsistence levels of welfare, they're forced to use food banks, which is charity food, that's food donated by me and you. Benefit Street, I think Benefit Street is a purveyor of the very myths and tabloid fantasies that I talked about earlier. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's fun, it's amusing, but let's not mistake it for serious documentary.
And 1 minute just to close up.
Oh, to close.
Why they should vote against this vile motion, basically.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a vile motion. I'd say it's a very deluded motion. What I would say is that I think everyone on the panels here has agreed that the system, the welfare system, is flawed and needs reforming. It needs to be made more humane and it needs to be made more efficient. And what the welfare system needs to be done is directed more to help people to get on in their life and to work. I think we're all agreed there. I think what this motion does is very strongly suggest that it's not the system that is flawed, but the people who are in receipt of benefits that are flawed. And I think that's a dangerous myth. It doesn't take us to where we want to go.
Camilla?
Well, in terms of Benefit Street, again, that whole stirring up of public opinion is similar to things that various other newspapers do.
Was there an element of truth in it?
I don't think there was. I think I think the whole idea of Benefit Street is it's just wholly unhelpful to how we approach this whole debate and how the general public think about it. And I don't think having programs like that help how people think about it. I think debates like this and actually making people aware of what the situation is far more helpful. There was a really good Channel 4 programme, again, a dispatches programme where Fraser Nelson looked at the gap in inequality, where a lot of the same themes are addressed, but in a much more informative and sensible way. It's things like that that we need much more of, not just this, what's going to make lots of people watch on a weekday evening.
And that's on 4OD people still. It just came out on Monday, so give it a good old check, yeah? Charities, very quickly.
In terms of charities, obviously in an ideal world, we'd have much less spending by government and charities looking after people in the way that hundreds and hundreds of years ago they did. But reiterating largely what Patrick has said, yes, we are, I think, where the system is so flawed at the moment, we are seeing charities plug a lot of the gaps where people just simply aren't being helped by the benefit system that we have. And that's true not only for people out of work, but that's true for people in work as well. So that's something to think about. In terms of summing up my argument, I think that the problem is we do have a dependency culture because of the system we have. And people depend because they have to, and the system fosters this culture where people have to depend on government handouts, be they tax credits, be they benefits, be they income support, and the system doesn't help people move away from that. It doesn't address the reason why the cost of living is so high, and it doesn't help people that have been out of work for long periods of time get back into work when the financial incentive isn't really important anymore. So that's why I think you should vote in favour of the motion.
Lovely, thank you. Mark?
The only time I've winced during this debate was at the idea that we should go back to hundreds of years ago when charities took care of people. I mean, that's Victorian, that's the literal definition of Dickensian. That's not something that I want to see, the sort of the generosity of the man about town handing out his money so that the poor people can have what they need, I think.
I said in an ideal world, obviously an ideal world is never going to happen.
But okay, in my ideal world, charity is not the way that we provide for people, it's community. I think there has been too much of a focus on the unaccountable, central, distant state, but I think that the state is still the answer, but it's a community-based, local state, a devolved state, and the state we can reach out and touch where our neighbours and our friends and our family are involved in it, rather than it being the benefits officer at the DWP.
But is that the state? Isn't that society?
Well, I don't think you can ever separate the society. I don't think you can ever, or entirely in something like welfare, completely disentangle society from the state. I think attempts to do that on both left and right have caused us quite significant problems. I think that has to be part of the solution we strive for, but it's going to take a long time.
Benefit Street?
Benefit Street. I was expecting to hate it. I didn't hate it anywhere near as much as I thought I did.
I remember characters, don't you?
I remember thinking this has got an awful name and it's been written up ludicrously in the press. This is going to be awful. But I decided to watch it, and some of the stories about what people's lives are like on benefits did resonate. And I did think a lot of people who do not know what it's like to live on benefits might take something away from this, and hopefully it won't be entirely negative. But the major problem I have is that there are too many people in this country who don't know anybody on benefits. Like, I only know a handful of people on benefits, but actually there are millions of people on benefits in this country. The vast majority of people in this country, though, seem to sometimes live in an existence where benefits are something that happens to other people. And if Benefit Street brought that a little bit into people's homes and people's lives and made them wonder if there are people living around the corner from them who are struggling to survive, then maybe that's not an entirely bad thing, despite the fact I think it was presented in a fairly crass way. Sort of Geordie Shore-ification of poverty documentaries. It's not entirely helpful, but if it gets it through.
And why should they side with you and vote against this sort of inaccurate prejudice motion? As
I said before, I don't think that you can have a culture of dependency if you can't depend on something. I think the way that our welfare system exists at the moment doesn't work for people. It doesn't provide them with enough support. It doesn't help them get back into work, but neither does it allow them any level of comfort or security. So you can't have a level of dependency on something you can't be dependent on, something that's not dependable. And in terms of mobility, sure, there are problems, but our system of class and social mobility in this country has much more fundamental problems than whether or not the state provides money for poor people to eat or not.
And John, propound the virtues of the motion. Yeah.
Oh yeah, good.
Oh well, charities. Let's do a bit.
Yeah, charities.
Benefits.
Yeah, I mean charities are charities since the Second World War have been the stopgaps. You know, like the big issue of stopgap, because governments turn their back on people in need. The large amount of people who I've worked with were people from the armed forces, from, like myself, ex-offenders, ex-druggies, and all sorts of things. And under the Major government and under the Blair government, there was very little support for it. But gradually, they got their act together and they took over a lot of these people. But they took over them and they turned them into indoor homeless, and they put them on benefit. They didn't give them the opportunity to develop.